quite often get asked to come and speak places. I do a lot of academic conferences. I do a lot of gambling conferences. I do a lot of standing up and chatting to people. I work with students. I work at universities. And I knew for a fact that the person that had contacted me through social media didn't know me as an international grandmaster, didn't know me as a 5-time world mind mapping champion, didn't know that essentially I colour in for a living. Instead, she'd been somebody who'd been following my story from back in 2009 when I got well and truly credit crunched. I mean, I got slammed, right? Within a space of about 30 days, I went from having a net worth of about £450,000, and I lost my business, I lost my bank accounts, I was under threat of having my house repossessed when the bank essentially withdrew their funding from the area of business that I was in. Now, they very kindly gave me 30 days to refinance my entire business. Right. Do you remember that funding crisis when none of the money was moving anywhere? Trust me, none of the money was moving anywhere because we looked hard, we looked long, and we didn't manage to save the business. So within the space of about 30 days, I went from a net worth of about 450,000 to standing in the bank one day with 71 pence and 3 nappies to my name. And later that afternoon, the sheriff's officers served papers on me to start the repossession period for my house. They wanted to take my house as well. And I distinctly remember standing in the bank as they were telling me, well, basically, you can't have access to any money. You can't have access to any of your personal accounts because naively, I assumed that I should bank where my business was. I've not made the same mistake as that again. And I decided that, well, the cleaned up version is sod that for a game of soldiers. Wasn't quite what I said, I have to admit. But basically, I said, no, I refuse to do this. You know, I can be down, I'm not out. You're telling me I am skint, but I am not broken. There is definitely a difference. One is a very temporary situation, the other is pretty fatal. So I made that decision, standing there in the bank that Tuesday morning when I only went to get a tenner out the hole in the wall because my son needed Calpol because he had an ear infection. So I was a bit ratty with the guys in the bank. I was a bit ratty. But I walked out of there and I thought, no, this isn't the end. But it is the beginning of something new. Definitely was. The fact that I'm standing here all these years later, I'm glad you guys are assuming there is a good story ending to this. There is. I did save the house. It took me about 18 months to pay the bank back the additional £10,000 personal guarantee that they wanted. And during that time, I didn't earn any more than £8,000 per year. So in a year and a half, I paid the bank back £10,000 and I saved the house. More importantly, I learned a lot of really good hints and tips and strategies about how to make your money do the work, how to make a pound do the work of a fiver, really, is what my friends say. So that was what I was asked to come here and talk to today. So I don't get to stand up here with the superhero cloak of being an expert, because I could stand up and I could talk about mind mapping and memory and study skills and speed reading and why you should do it until the cows come home. Instead, what she asked me to do was to come here and to tell a story, and the story is the story of me, of my family, and what we've really learned over the last few years in this very economically uncertain time. That day in the bank, there was an almighty collision in the world's perception of me and my perception of myself. What they wanted me to do is they wanted me to be a good little girl and follow the rules of the tribe and go and do what I was told, which was to give up the house, to declare bankruptcy, to go and sign on, and to reconcile myself to being a single mother on benefits on the breadline. I don't think I've got that in me. I think I was so angry at that point, I was looking for a way to get back at them, to literally get back at the banks. I needed to find a way that I could go and I could start rebuilding our future. Because in one fell swoop, what they'd not only done was take my business, they'd taken the economic future for my boys, the security that I'd been building for 20 years, and in the space of 30 days, it was wiped away from me. My perception internally was very different from their perception of me. my decision on that day was to take a journey that made me a maverick, made me step outside the tribe and not really obey the rules that everyone expected me to do. And that's where the really exciting stuff happened. I went home, I sat down at my kitchen table, and I began one of the world's most exciting social experiments I've ever been involved in. And I was experimenting on me, I was experimenting on my kids, I was experimenting with our home, I was experimenting with everything that I perceived to be right and wrong and valid about the rules of money. Now, we were in a pretty economically uncertain time. Truth be told, I don't think we're that much more certain now. I think we've just become a little more immune to the ups and downs, the ebbs and flows of the economics of the politics of our country just now. But what I did realise was that being a specialist probably wasn't going to get me to my end result the quickest way possible. I began with a hypothesis that said that specialism is really a luxury of an economy that is both stable and optimistic. Now, I'm not saying don't be a specialist, because 30 days ago I underwent spinal surgery. Trust me, the person I wanted in the operation room with me that day was a specialist, right? The hospital handyman really wasn't going to cut it. But what I did realize is that alongside our specialisms, what we need to be doing is developing a whole other skill set that really takes us back into being true polymaths, to have a real wide base in our knowledge base, to go back to being like a child, to be excited about learning new things. And what I discovered was that the smarter I got at learning new things, the cheaper we as a family could live. And as I began to look at this and watch the figures coming down month upon month, I got more and more excited about it and wanted to go and look into this closer. So an example for recent history of specialists and generalists. When the Russians did the oil embargo against North Korea and Cuba, North Korea decided, as a fairly traditional communist country, very top-heavy, autocratic, everybody knew their role and they had to do what they said, they decided that business would be as usual. But without the oil, the lights went out. Without the oil, the trains stopped running. Without the oil, the tractors stopped ploughing. And countless communities starved. We may never know the full outcome of that economic policy. Cuba, on the other hand, who were presented with the same problem, said instead, tell the people, grow food where they live. Tell them to go out into their gardens, out onto the side of the road, into the empty spaces in our cities, tell them to grow food, and if they have a surplus, feed their community. And within 3 years, Cuba, still a communist country, was feeding its people, and not only that, but the people were the healthiest they had ever been, because they were eating local food, freshly grown, and right on their doorstep. So two different reactions to the same set of circumstances. I decided that, frankly, I'd rather be a Cuba than a North Korea. So I started with that premise that perhaps specialism, a rigid way of thinking, wasn't going to be the way forward for me, that I needed to become more of a generalist. I needed to widen the toolkit of skills that I had. I also decided that actually you can't penny pinch your way to prosperity. There's only so many ways you can stop spending money. You can't get rich by being cheap, because when you get there, you're still cheap. Right? So there had to be a two-pronged approach, if you like, and that's what I started getting into. I decided that hair shirt mentality when it came to money wasn't going to serve me. It's a bit like a crash diet. You can start off with great intentions about, I'm not going to eat that chocolate, I'm not going to eat that cake, I'm not going to buy those crisps, and before you know it, it's Thursday, you've fallen off the diet, and you're sitting there and you're hoovering up crisp sandwiches followed by chocolate bars and cream cakes. It just doesn't work in a long-term, sustainable way. So I decided instead that I would look to find the solutions, that I would look to be a polymath, a true polymath. Not the polymaths I talk about in my real job, the Einsteins or the Da Vincis, the people that had lots and lots of interests and had lots and lots of skills that they could draw on. Instead, I would consciously go out and I would teach myself stuff. And I was able to go and start teaching myself lots of different crafting techniques and cooking techniques and things within the home that saved me a lot of money, and also things like building techniques. I built my 5-year-old son his own bedroom by partitioning off part of a very large room in my house, and I learned to do that. But I also knew that reducing the amount of money we spent as a family on a monthly basis was only part of the equation. What I also needed to do was I also needed to increase the income that was coming in. And coming from one particular place, my specialism, wasn't nearly secure enough for me. Instead, I wanted to have money coming in from lots of different areas. Because in an economy, when people can't pay for high-end educational seminars, maybe what they can do is they can buy a little bit of this, or they can buy a little article, or they can get you on the radio, or they can do this, or you can manage a garden and you can grow some of your own food, or you could bake your own bread, or you can make your own yogurt, or you can knit your own yurt, or you can learn how to feed your family on 2 lentils and some belly fluff. Right? But you need to be doing lots and lots of different things, and the term that we came up for that was breadonomics. 1 slice at a time, because we knew the crash diet mentality when it came to money wasn't going to work. It was too painful. The change was too big, and face it, people don't really like change. Change is difficult, it's uncomfortable, it pulls people out of their comfort zones. So breadonomics was about trimming our expenditure 1 slice at a time, and literally came out of a conversation when we were calculating how much money we spent on bread per year. If as a family you buy, say, I don't know, 2 loaves of bread, a packet of wraps, some pita breads for the weekend, maybe a packet of bagels, you spend £5 on bread products every week. Over a year, that's about, maths in my head, £280. Or you could take half an hour and get somebody to teach you how to make bread, and you could do that in a few minutes every week, spend maybe £1 on the ingredients, and save yourself £208 per year. Now, £208 per year is not going to get you rich. But if you look at how many areas in your life you could slice a little bit off the top, and maybe next week slice a little bit off the top again, that money soon begins to ramp up. More importantly, it soon begins to ramp up without a feeling of deprivation. Because my family still had fantastic standard of living. In fact, a better standard of living. They much prefer the homemade bread, the pita breads, the pastas, the baking that goes on in our house now to the shop-bought varieties, but it costs us much less. So we have a higher standard of living, but we have a much lower expenditure. And that way I had the family on board. We literally became Team Collier. The other thing that we always say in our house is you can do anything for 15 minutes. Now, I know that was partly a con to get my 4-year-old to start tidying up his bedroom. But the reality is, most of us can go and learn something in 15 minutes. You can learn how to bake in 15 minutes. You can learn how to knit in 15 minutes. Hop onto YouTube and have a look at a video. There are lots and lots and lots of different ways that you can begin to extend that little toolkit of skills that you've got that gradually begin to reduce your expenditure, and means that the gap between what you're spending and what you're earning becomes bigger and bigger and bigger as time goes on. And that's where you find real economic freedom, when you're not spending right up to your income. There's a little bit of excess that can be invested for the future. So 15 minutes to go and find, to go and learn, to go and do something. But what if it's a technique that's going to take longer than 15 minutes? Well, there's an academic not a million miles away from here, actually, a guy called Sugatra Mitra. If you pop him into a search engine and you're looking for the hole-in-the-wall guy, and he's a guy that came up with something called the granny cloud, and a brilliantly perceptive piece of analysis. And he says the best people to teach anybody anything is a granny. Because they've got time, they've got experience, and they want to show you. So I set myself a challenge one week. My challenge was to learn how to, believe it or not, knit a pair of socks. Right? Not because I needed to be able to knit a pair of socks. I wanted to use it as a learning technique for myself. So I took a ball of wool, a knitting pattern, a pair of knitting needles, and I took myself off to the local tea shop where the grannies hang out, where the granny mafia drinks in my own village. And I plonked down and proceeded to make a complete hash of casting on a pair of socks. And it took 12 minutes before 2 grannies approached me and says, "Would you like a bit of help with that, love?" Right? Find a granny. Grannies know all sorts of great stuff. And if they don't, they know a granny who does. If you want to plant an organic garden, yeah, chances are she's got a boyfriend that does that. Right? If you want to be making jam, chances are she's got the fruit bushes in her garden. If you send your kids around to pick the fruit, then she'll show you how to make jam. Right? You want to learn how to make fancy cakes, she's got a friend that does that too. Right? The grannies have got a wonderful network that you can tap into, and they can't wait to share stuff with you. The other people to approach are experts in their field. You've got no idea how flattered experts are when people come up to them and say, can you show me to do what your passion is? They will spend hours with you sharing the ins and outs of their own particular passion. I've learned how to service my car because I asked the mechanic. Now, I think he's doing himself out of a job, but he's taught me how to be able to service my car. I learned how to plaster by mixing up some plaster and working with a plasterer so that I could do that for my son's bedroom. Everybody who's got a particular specialism or a passion can't wait for somebody to ask them, show me how you did that. So most of the ways that I learned to save money didn't cost me any money. They cost me a little bit of bravery, sitting down in a cafe and taking out the knitting pins and really making a hash of casting on. Turns out I was doing it back to front. But you know, now I can knit socks. Did one pair, by the way. Proved a point, don't need to do it again. On to the next thing I want to learn, okay? So I'm raising 2 men in my house. I don't call it raising boys. I've come to the conclusion over the last few years that my job is not actually to raise boys. My job is actually to grow some men. And you become a different kind of parent when you're looking at building independence into your children from a young age so that they can be really independent. So they get to the point where they go through the door and they look over the shoulder and they go, bye, Mum, it's been great, but I'm on an adventure. So I'm now raising men. These men know absolutely, fundamentally, that for us as a family, education is not negotiable. It's something they see modeled every day. They see their mom being a beginner at lots and lots of stuff, and they see her being a success at some of it. But I never stop learning, because the smarter I get, the cheaper we live as a family. Little point of reference, most families spend about £500 per month on food. Now, we are a foodie family. We like good food, and we like quite a lot of it. Over the last year, our average spend per week has been £18 per week on food for a family of 3. We spend less than £100 per month on food, and we eat well. You want to see what we eat? Hop over to the website. There are loads and loads of recipes and tutorials there that cost pennies for absolutely restaurant quality food. My boys, including my son, who was invited here to a TED Talk today, the youngest person in the room, didn't bring the 5-year-old. Didn't think you'd appreciate that. He'd have been herring up and down the aisle, but I brought the big boy. He's 12. He's going into his 2nd year at high school next year, and he absolutely gets that he is in a period of his life where his education at the moment is free, and he is making the very best he can of every opportunity that comes to him in high school, because he can see a point beyond high school where education does become very, very, very expensive for him. So he's taking the most of every opportunity, and he comes with me when I'm working with experts, and he learns lots of other different things as well. So what does the future look like for Team Collier, which is what my boys call us? Well, despite me having a fairly pessimistic view on our economic situation at the moment, our economic situation as a family is actually very, very positive. We've pulled it round. Bearing in mind, I started at kind of minus £450,000. I was so far underwater, you couldn't even see the surface. We saved the house, paid the bank back every penny it was looking for. We're now living on a very comfortable standard of living, but it doesn't cost us a lot of money every month. And we are overpaying our mortgage and building up our financial security like you would not believe. And everybody that visits our house thinks it's just a normal house. We're not beardy weirdies knitting our own yurts. We have a garden, but we drive a car. We're just very, very careful about where we select to spend our money. And really, being a good Scots person, I'm looking to have the best bang for my buck I possibly can. I've had a great time at home with my little son, who's going up to primary school after the summer. So I know that for me, for myself, my time of being a teacher at home with my boy, particularly in the afternoons, is coming to an end. And I'm quite sad about that. I've really enjoyed having him around. So I know that what I'm looking to do is to start my next very big adventure. And I'm pretty sure that the skills I've learned in the last 4 years about building community, about building ties, about being very savvy and smart with my money are going to stand both me and my family and the wider community in really good stead. So to sum it up, a very smart lady friend of mine from Manchester Business School, a proper social scientist with, degrees up the wazoo and letters after her name, phoned me yesterday as we got on the bus and the train to come down here and says, you should never, ever, ever ask a type A personality to figure out how to feed her family or to keep her family on less than £1,000 a month. Because the one thing you can guarantee is that in 3 months' time, she's going to be back showing you how she can do it on only £200. Just to say, nah, I told you so. So what I'd like for you guys to take away from this is just to be conscious of the decisions that you make every day, the perceptions that you have about how you spend your money, the decisions that you make that may mean that you're making them as part of the tribe, but you could step out sideways for a little while and decide to walk the maverick path for a time in order to get your finances more secure, that you don't have to lose a standard of living just because you're not spending the money. I didn't specialize in spending less money. Instead, spending less money was a direct product of me expanding my knowledge and my skill set. And over the last few years, when I've been raising a little boy in order to get him off to school, it has been an absolute blast. Thank you.